Welcome to Inside Sim Racing. I'm Shaun Cole, and today I have sort of a DIY slash product preview slash review. And you know, it's to the point now when I think about products and certain products and how do we score them? And I think in certain cases, such as the TACHBOX by Kompas Technologies goes, I don't think it'd be fair to score it because I'm not sure what I'd actually be comparing it to. So in this case, this is something I'm going to tell you all about it, show you how it works, and then you can decide for yourself what your score would be essentially. What this is a TACHBOX. It's very similar to an SLI, and you can see you have a row of LEDs here that are going to work as a tachometer or your RPM gauge. And you also can see a gear indicator right here in the middle. So it's very similar to other things we've shown on the show. What we also have are buttons and dials similar to some other button boxes that maybe we've seen, both incorporated into one piece. And this one piece actually, and this is where the DIY part comes in, and I have my heavily modified Logitech wheel. This is made for the Logitech G25 or G27, and it actually is going to go in here and replace the buttons and the tachometer that comes on the G27 in the case of that wheel. So the first step, looking at their instruction sheet, which is right here, says with a proper sized Allen key, remove the 6 hex screws from the Logitech G27 wheel. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Installation of the wheel is pretty straightforward and only deals with the wheel portion of the G27. You first remove the 6 Allen screws that are holding the wheel to the base. Remove the center hub and the screws and carefully hold onto the wheel. And there we go. So these are the original screws. I'm just going to put them aside because I have a feeling we're not going to need them again. Step number 2. Once the wheel is loose and unmounted, carefully detach the connected wires from the hub that connect the 6 buttons on either side of the wheel. Note, you will not be able to use these buttons once disconnected. I think I alluded to that. I'm going to go ahead and do one more thing real quick. I'm going to make sure I have my wheel right there. Okay. So now I'm pulling the wheel off, and what we have is 2 connectors inside. So at this point I realize there is another tool that I'm going to need in doing this, and that is the needle nose pliers. What I don't want to do is pull on these wires. They're very delicate, and what I want to do is actually reach in and pull each little plug off very, very carefully. It's very fragile in here, and you don't want to do any damage. And again, in doing that, what we have done is actually made the buttons of the wheel useless. It also means that I have the buttons still mounted and the wires just dangling, and we'll get to that later as well. So I'm going to put the wheel aside, and another thing is we're going to need to remove the little lens. This is the lens for the original tack on the G27 if you're doing that kind of wheel. And that basically gets us to what they're calling step 2. For me, that's a few steps in, A, B, C, but now step 2 is attaching the TACHBOX and the wheel. So we need a spacer, and we need a wheel, and we need to start putting it back together again, it says. Include our 2 spacers to allow more versatility when mounting various wheels, including, but not limited to, the stock G27 wheel. If you intend to use the original G27 wheel, we suggest using 1 spacer either behind or in front of the TACHBOX. Now, I'm actually going to go in front of, because I'm going to leave these wires on for now, and I just want to give a little clearance so I don't pinch those wires. And then what I'm going to do is put the Logitech center back in, and I'm going to use that as a guide, and I'm going to start installing these screws one by one. Included with the kit are 2 different spacers. Depending on what wheel you are going to mount will affect which spacers you use. Once you've figured out the combination you like, you then want to carefully line up the wheel and its hub with the spacers, the TACHBOX, and then insert all screws through the holes. This will keep everything together in one unit when you go to put it onto the base. Then center the unit onto the G27 body and start to tighten down the screws. I like to work in a star pattern, tightening each screw a few turns so that no screw is more tightened than the rest of them, working my way around until I've tightened them all equally. Okay, I guess you got to put a little into it, but now that thing's on there. And it's now front heavy, so a little warning, you might want to put your wheel like that so it doesn't fall over. And then we have the beige cable included. So I'm going to go ahead and get to the next phase of installing it onto my rig and zip tying down that cable and plugging it in. So let's go ahead and take a small break, and when we come back, I'll be mounting it.
Does a real race car have a center post? Of course not, and neither should your race rig. The R-Seat Evo V3 with its unique design has no center post. The R-Seat Evo replicates what you would be accustomed to in your daily driver or something you may take to the track. It can accommodate drivers from 4'11" up to over 6'6" tall and is pre-drilled for all of the major wheel manufacturers on the market today. When it comes to performance, look no further than the R-Seat Evo V3. Check out the R-Seat Evo and other sim racing equipment by heading to www.rseat.net.
So I have it mounted to my rig, and you can see I've used the zip tie that they supplied me to attach this to the very bottom behind the shifters. That way, when I get it around, that cord shouldn't obstruct me too much. And I am noticing a little bit of noise coming off my wheel that I didn't hear before. Sounds like it was only because of that cord rubbing, so nothing there. And then I would attach this, and that would give it the ability to move around. If you go full 900 degrees, I can see that's going to be a problem right off the bat. And I can see some rubbing going on. That's just something that's always been tough about adding an SLI to a wheel. So I did just notice one other problem, and my kit only came with one spacer, but I am noticing that I still have play in the wheel. And I have bottomed these bolts out, so that means there's not adequate spacing for these. Screws are too long, perhaps. I'm going to have to look into that. That's a little troubling. So as you can see, I was having a little bit of trouble with the standard Logitech wheel, and I didn't like that I was disabling the 6 buttons, and I was going to have these cords unless I unmount it all. And it kind of led me to doing something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and that was utilize a different wheel altogether. So I happen to have this nice suede Momo wheel, which not everybody be so lucky to have one of these laying around, but I happen to. And I went ahead and used the adapter to make my hole template. And I went ahead and got holes ready to go. And now I should be able to just mount this on instead. And we'll kind of just pick up right where we left off with this other version. From that point, the installation was the same. Just line up the wheel, the spacers, the TACHBOX, the screws that go into the G27, it's all pretty simple. With such a fine piece of hardware, the G27 wheel just looked kind of funny. Plus, I didn't like seeing the buttons that were now useless to me. So I used the spacer supplied with the wheel as a template and drilled holes in my Momo wheel to now go on this TACHBOX. The next step is to deal with the new coil wire that is going to our wheel. I found it best to zip tie the coil to the bottom spoke of my wheel, and this kept it from rubbing too much on the bottom of the base of the G27. Now onto the software side of things, which are also pretty easy. You must download the SLI Manager software from eksimracing.com. This software controls all of the main functions of the box. Download and install the software, which might cost you an additional $7. With the software running, everything was really plug and play. I fired up iRacing and it automatically knew what car I was driving in and adjusted the rev lights to the proper RPM. Jump on the gas and the rev lights go crazy with a very bright display working left to right. There are also other indicators using LEDs for things like end of pit road, caution, blown up motor, low on fuel. Then comes the main part of the display. Right in the very middle, a very large gear indicator with different displays left and right of that. And that brings me to a couple of the dials on the wheel. The left dial, labeled in yellow, actually controls the left display and will change what type of information is being shown. I can have it show my speed, fuel and speed, position and speed, lap and speed, SO1 and speed, then some funny thing I don't know about, water temp, oil temp, and then all 4 different tire pressures. The right dial, the red one, adjusts the display to the right of the gear indicator, and it can be switched between lap times, position, speed, clock, and RPM. Then in addition to that, I have 4 new dedicated buttons, yellow, red, green, and orange, just to make it easy to remember what they do. The software is completely programmable, and you can add or subtract items from the left or right displays from appearing. You can also make adjustments to the rev lights and every indicator light on the unit. The only problem is that there are no instructions, so you'll be reading through forum threads and using trial and error at times to change settings. Now, a nice thing is that the software is compatible with pretty much every sim racing software out there. Now, not all sims will work the same with the unit, and you might be back to trial and error again to get it figured out right. Once I had everything installed and the software running, it was time to get out in a sim. I fired up iRacing and headed out onto the track. The Tach or RPM lights are very bright and can't be missed. The visual cues for shifting being delivered by both increasing amounts of LEDs as well as 2 blinking LEDs for shift light indication. The gear indicator is right in the center and is also very noticeable. Now, I've basically swapped the 6 buttons on the Logitech wheel for new buttons that are much more realistic and not necessarily easier to use. The box itself has pushed the paddle shifters farther away from my fingertips, but they're still in a good range for operation. So now that I have this thing all installed, I have the software up and running, it's time for me to do a few more laps. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, I'm going to go over the pros, cons, and then I am going to give it a final score. Welcome back to my review of the Kompas Technologies TACHBOX, and now it's time to go over the pros and cons, and I'm going to start things off with the cons. And the first con is the price. It's $390 for the unit itself. In my case, I added a $200 wheel to that, so that takes me to about $600, and that's all going on a Logitech body, which is a $200 to $300 wheel. So some might question the sanity in that to begin with. Now, when I compare this to its competitors, like the Z1 Sim wheel, the Rosa wheel, the ARC wheel, those wheels all come in the $700 to $1,200 range. So those are also for the Logitech wheel. The next con is that there is an extreme lack of support for the software. You will need to be a semi-computer genius just to get the most out of this device. Now, for simple default stuff, it does work right out of the box. Another con is the increased distance to the shifters. Some people with smaller hands might not actually like that increased distance. Another con of the TACHBOX is the disabling of the stock Logitech buttons. Now, I changed my wheel, so I've already forgotten about them, but if I had 6 useless buttons on my wheel, I'd be a little upset about that. Another con is the low quality screws that came with the kit. I would have liked to have seen some Allen heads or something that at least mimicked the ones that were on the stock Logitech wheel. And the last con is the heavy-duty extra wire that now goes to my wheel. Now, I find it's really only in the way during calibration. When I'm driving, yes, it's there, but it's really never been a problem. So that pretty much does it for my cons. Now it's time to look at the pros. And the first one is very obvious, very noticeable, and it's the complete transformation that I've done to my Logitech wheel. I don't think the guys at Logitech would even recognize this as a Logitech wheel anymore. It just looks and feels and operates like a real formula wheel. Another pro is the main point of the device, which is not just to look cool. This thing is delivering me more information that I need as a driver. Having visual cues to help me with shifting is a huge advantage. And for those like myself that occasionally forget what gear they're in, that gear indicator can be a huge savior. Being able to use a dial on the wheel to sort through different information makes me feel like a real driver. Granted, I could use a keyboard or a button box, but this is what a real driver would be doing in the car. Something else that is a pro is the quality of the construction. The box is very well put together and has no rough edges. It even has a very nice carbon fiber finish look to it. Another pro is the quality of the buttons and dials on this box. The radial dials have an extremely heavy click when turned to a new position. The double dials move very smoothly and also have a nice click feel when turned. Another pro is the customizability and the compatibility with games. So I've been using it in iRacing, but it does work with just about every sim. More importantly, if you want to take the time to set this up, you can make it read out all sorts of different information. Another pro is the brightness adjustability. When I first got this, I thought it was a waste to have one of the dials dedicated to the brightness of the display. Then I found during daylight that I have it set much brighter than I do during the evenings, and I can turn that dial on the fly to make that adjustment. Another pro for me is that the wheel allowed me to use different wheels. It's not really an adapter, but it made it very easy to go to a different wheel at this point in time. So when considering this product or any one like it, you really have to think about what and why you are trying to accomplish. If you want the ultimate in realism, or just wanting to blow your friends away, it's hard to beat out this TACHBOX. But if you're on a budget and just trying to be the fastest sim racer around, you might not need a device like this. And therefore, on the rev scale, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Now, the Kompas Technologies TACHBOX comes in at $390, and compared to some other similar items, it's right in line pricing-wise. One thing to remember is that at the heart of this is the SLI Pro made by Leo Bodner. The board is the heart of many of those same types of products. The board itself goes for $160, and it would be hard to make a box as nice as this one. Throw in some very high-end dials and buttons, and you can see where the money is gone. Now, Kompas Technologies is just getting things started. In fact, they don't even have a website yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a thread in our forum for Kompas Technologies, and if you have any questions, want to find out how to order one, throw your questions there, and hopefully Martin Kompas will get in there and be able to answer those questions. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of the TACHBOX. I have really enjoyed being able to use it. I'm Shaun Cole, and I'll see you on the track.